Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Depot Dive. I'm Ross McCorkle, your host, and above me on the screen, Joe Clark, my co-host every single week. Before we get started on today's show, I do want to plug the phone number at the bottom of the screen. You can leave a question for us that we will answer at the end of each episode. We are in need of some more questions. And I'm sure they'll start rolling in here with training camp set to begin a week from today, I think. Next Wednesday, the players will report. Next Thursday, the practices will begin. So a lot more to talk about very soon. But for now, just kind of some end of off-season topics for today that we will discuss. Joe, before we get started, how are you doing today?
Good, doing well. Gearing up for the start of camp. Gonna be busy.
Is your have you won the college football national championship yet? Where's your squad at with that?
So I haven't gotten that far into it yet. I started one test dynasty just to sim a little bit and get a feel for the game with Temple, and by somehow against all odds, that Temple squad went 10-3, won the American and won the Fenway Bowl. But I dove into a main dynasty that I've been playing with UMass. I've been some ups and downs. We got shellacked by Miami of Ohio, 45-0 on the road, but followed up with a nice little road win over Northern Illinois. So right now I'm sitting at 3-3 with a matchup against number three Missouri looming, which is going to be extremely ugly.
It's been a lot of fun watching everybody dive into that game the last few days. A lot of content out there around that. I haven't gotten a chance to play it myself yet, but maybe after training camp when we have a little more time, I will attempt to look at that. But moving into our Steelers topics for the week. Uh, Yesterday, some news broke, and some people might not get as excited about this, but I think most people are pretty pleased overall, just given the familiarity and the name value there. But the Steelers have re-signed Tyler Matakevich on what is it? Just a 1 year deal?
Yeah, I think I don't know. They didn't say financial terms, but I'm pretty sure it was just a 1 year deal.
And it's funny because I was looking, I forget exactly what I was even looking at. I think it was looking at the joint practice that's about to take place with the Bills and Steelers towards the end of training camp. And I was just trying to see, okay, which Steelers are going to be returning home to Acrisure Stadium. And I saw, obviously Trubisky and Chase Claypool. And I was wondering, I was like, I swear Matakevich is on this roster, but he was a free agent. And, just a couple of days later, the Steelers go ahead and sign him. And yeah, what's your initial reaction on bringing Dirty Red back to Pittsburgh?
I mean, I love it. He was one of my favorite players back when he was on the team. Just a guy that, I mean, his nickname kind of summarizes what he did. He did the dirty work on special teams. Went to Buffalo, did the same thing for there. Was a special teams captain, and the new kickoff rules are going to play a part. You need as many guys who kind of have that special teams talent as possible. The Steelers' special teams core got hurt a little bit this offseason. It was kind of an underrated area where the team lost some guys. And we did see, with some of their not as noteworthy additions and guys that might not make the roster, but, a guy like Jonathan Ward, it had special teams ability. But none of those guys were really, definite. You were going to be definite, roster locks, make the team, and be able to. You weren't sure if there would be a guy that like, hey, you can peg him to contribute on special teams. And now I think Matakevich, given his experience in Pittsburgh, his experience in the league, I think it's pretty safe to say that. Well, he's not a lock. He's not 100%, but he's got a pretty good chance to make this roster. And for a team that lost, Elijah Riley played like 62. Let me pull it up real quick. Elijah Riley played 62% of their special team snaps last season. Miles Boykin played 70%. James Pierre played 64%. Riley is gone, Boykin's gone, and Pierre's gone. All in the NFC East. I think Boykin signed with the Giants. Riley signed with the Giants and Pierre signed with the Washington Commanders. So all three of those guys are gone. So you add another key special teamer in a year where special teams might end up being, pretty important with the new kickoff rule. And they're always important. But for a Steelers team that, the field position game is going to be super important with how they run the ball. It's a signing that I really, really like, especially this late in the process. Definitely came as a little bit of a surprise. Don't get much news this time of year, but a really just solid move right before camp.
Yeah, I totally agree there. Looking at Matakevich's special team snaps by year. He's played over 300 in every season except for his first two with the Steelers, and in both of those seasons he was pretty close. We're talking about a guy who's playing, between 70-80% of his team special team snaps. He can play on multiple units, and so he's going to be a good piece to use on all the different special teams units this year. And like you said, the kickoff will be probably the most notable because he's a guy who can fly around, knock some heads around, and make some special teams tackles. And so that is perfect for the new set of special teams rules. This does bring up an interesting question, though, about roster construction and the 53-man roster. Obviously, the Steelers will need to cut down. They're currently at 90, or actually 91, with Julius Welshoff, the international player with an exemption currently. But they will have to cut down to 53 there at the end of August. I think that's on August 20th, 20-something, towards, right after the last preseason game takes place. And so for inside linebacker, Mark Robinson's a guy who's basically just been a special teamer. I mean, last year we're talking about the Steelers started 7, I think, different inside linebackers, and Mark Robinson really was an afterthought in that whole situation. They preferred to bring guys in from, they literally brought guys out of retirement. They brought guys off the practice squad, and all of them were just leapfrogging Mark Robinson. So that tells you they don't really trust him as an inside linebacker. He hasn't progressed the way that people hoped. I mean, there was some hope early on that he could progress into, your classic thumper inside linebacker, but it doesn't appear to have played out that way. He's been more of a special teams player, and, I would give the edge probably to Matakevich in terms of just special teams value. Do you think Robinson's spot is firmly at risk now?
Yeah, no, I think Robinson's definitely have to put together a really good camp now to kind of stick. It's kind of a numbers game. The Steelers have a lot of talented inside linebackers right now. I think the big question would really become if Cole Holcomb does start the year on the PUP list, which he'll probably start training camp on the PUP list, I would assume. I know Mike Tomlin said he might be ready, but he can start camp and come off that at any time. But if he starts the regular season, that's a different question. It frees up a roster spot. So then you kind of open up a spot for both Matakevich and Robinson. But then, when Holcomb comes back, then at that point, if Robinson hasn't really done much, then I think his roster spot's at risk. So even if he is on the roster to start the season, throughout, he might not be there on, week 17. So I definitely think he's somebody that is kind of, this is a move that really affects his standing. And I mean, it's been tough. I mean, he's a converted running back. He played 1 year at linebacker at Ole Miss, and then now 2 years in the NFL. It just hasn't progressed, I guess, as hoped. He was kind of a dart throw as a 7th-round pick anyway, but obviously there was a lot of that buzz before his first, training camp, and Vince Williams really said, "Oh, he's a mini me" or something along those lines. So, similar build is, like you said, a guy that could maybe become that thumper, but it just hasn't worked out. And I mean, again, he was a 7th-round pick. It's not as if this is a miss by the Steelers, but he was a guy that I think a lot of people had some high hopes for. And I mean, again, he could have a really good camp and play his way onto the roster, but I think the Mark Robinson chapter in Pittsburgh might be pretty close to being finished.
Yeah, just looking at how many inside linebackers they kept in each of the last 2 seasons, it was 4 on both occasions. And so obviously if Cole Holcomb is healthy, then, you're talking about, I would assume they will probably make space for Matakevich at this point. So maybe they do keep 5, but they're certainly not going to keep 6. And so he really will be in a primary competition with Matakevich. I would probably give the edge to the newcomer in this case. And so, yeah, Mark Robinson probably isn't long for this roster. I think I was on the fence about him in my most recent 53-man roster prediction that I made a couple of weeks ago, and now it's looking, I would have a very difficult time finding a way to get him on the roster. I mean, could he be a guy that sticks around on the practice squad and might be elevated a couple times throughout the season? Maybe, I don't know what kind of demand he will have out there. He could very well be stashed away on the practice squad. So maybe he'll still stick around in some form or fashion, but in terms of the initial 53, probably not at this point. That brings us to our second topic here. We're going to talk about pre-camp extensions, that being, will anybody receive an extension prior to the start of the season? or really here in the next, is anybody going to get extended here over the next week before camp? And if not, are we talking about, maybe somebody getting extended over the course of camp leading up to the start of the regular season in early September? The obvious candidates for that are Pat Freiermuth, Cam Hayward, who's been kind of, I don't want to say causing a stink, but he obviously wants a new contract. And then Najee Harris is kind of a dark horse after the team declined his fifth-year option. Joe, if you had to pick between the three of those players, who do you think is getting done, and what is the time? What might the timing look like on that?
Before camp, I think it might be tough to get something done at this point. I mean, we just haven't heard a lot. Everything we've heard about the Steelers and Hayward is that they aren't particularly close. The Steelers don't seem to be super motivated to get something done early. And for that, I guess I would say Freiermuth. I mean, it's been pretty quiet on that front, just the expectation that he's going to get an extension. And I think it would ultimately be a surprise if he didn't get one, but it might be one that does happen during camp instead of ahead of camp. But I think of, those three guys, he's probably the most likely to sign one. The Steelers, obviously, number two receiver has been a problem for him. We've talked about is probably going to be that de facto number two guy. Some high hopes for him this season. I think he's still going to get paid. He's still going to command a good chunk of change, but I think it makes more sense for the Steelers to pay him now than wait until after the season when obviously, he could become a free agent. They'd have to pay him a lot more if he has a big season or throw the franchise tag on him. As for Harris, that's another one that I think if he does get extended, it would happen during camp. It's going to be interesting to see, what he says to open up camp. He's obviously last year he was very vocal about the running back contracts. Now his fifth-year options decline. So hearing from Harris next week is probably going to be, one of the bigger stories coming out of the first week of Steelers camp, especially, no pads. It's not a whole lot to go off of, but hear from the players and a guy like Harris that we haven't heard from all offseason. It's going to be interesting to hear what he has to say about his contract situation. But yeah, I would put Freiermuth as the most likely, and I think they'll get something done with him before the season. Um, I mean, obviously Hayward wants to get something done, and I do think the team wants him, but just given his age, coming off the injury, I think maybe they just want to see how he looks when he reports to camp. And I mean, they saw him in OTAs, and I think he's probably healthy this season, and he could be back to form for as an all-pro level defensive lineman. So I would think something would get done before the season with him, but we'll see. I mean, it's been interesting to hear that the two sides just haven't been particularly close for much of the offseason, even with Hayward kind of making it clear that he wants an extension.
Yeah, I've kind of been firmly on, I don't know, over the last month or so, kind of on the side of not extending him until next offseason even. I don't think he's not going to be a guy who's going to hold out in the actual season. He's playing for his legacy. He's playing for his Hall of Fame chances. He talks about that all the time or makes, kind of subtweets that allude to that all the time on social media. This is a guy who wants to play a few more seasons because I think he thinks that he still has it in him. He talked about, maybe being comfortable playing elsewhere. If need be, like he's not just going to take the Polamalu route and just kind of retire once the Steelers say maybe that they're not going to extend him. I agree with you. I think the Steelers probably want him, but I don't really see a huge reason to get it done prior to or really anytime until next offseason. Like he was kind of, I think we've kind of proven, or he proved himself that he was kind of bluffing when he talked about Cleveland and, maybe I'll go to, Cleveland because we got family there and stuff like that. And then he followed it up and said his wife, was basically sick when hearing that and basically saying he would never go there. And so I think some of that stuff's just kind of a little bit of bluffing involved, just kind of negotiation tactics. I don't really see a huge reason to get the deal done because I believe they will be able to next offseason with way better intel. Obviously, if he suffers another injury this year, that factors into a possible extension. Maybe you don't extend him at that point, or at least it comes in a little bit cheaper than it would have otherwise. I just don't see a real need or reason to get that done this year at this point. And so I guess, we'll see. I'm open to being wrong there, but just given that there hasn't really been much talk, That's kind of the way I am leaning. As far as Najee Harris, I mean, what we heard from him at that UFC or not UFC, but one of those boxing fights that took place recently on I forget what card that was a couple of weeks ago, but I mean, he seemed, there wasn't any malcontent kind of vibes coming from him. He said he's excited. He said the Steelers have done some good things this offseason, and I forget exactly what his quote was, but he's essentially excited for the year. And so is there going to be a hold in? Maybe, but I don't really see him being this like malcontent thing. And in terms of him getting getting an extension prior to the season, I would say I'd put that, probably below 35% chance, 30% chance, somewhere in that range. I do think there's a possibility. Omar Khan obviously said he would love for Harris to be a Steeler for life, or have him, for his whole career, or whatever the exact phrasing of that was. And, I think that was genuine. But at the same time, he called it a business decision. What exactly does that mean? What exactly held them back from picking up the option, which wasn't really all that expensive in the first place. And so I'm leaning towards a no on him. Freiermuth, I think, is very likely. It will be kind of interesting to see where that number comes in, just given where his production was at a career low last year. He had the injury stuff. He's had concussion issues throughout his career, but on the other hand, Arthur Smith runs a tight end friendly offense, and this is a guy who could have easily have a career year this year, and be a top 5 to 7 or somewhere in that range tight end in the league if everything goes according to plan. And so where exactly does that number come in? Do you kind of price in the fact that you think he's going to have a good year? I mean, if you're Freiermuth and his agent, you're probably talking about that at least. And so that one will be particularly interesting, and maybe that one even lasts until maybe the last week or something before the season begins, just so they can gauge where he's at during training camp and make sure that everything's going according to plan. But of the three, I would agree Freiermuth the most likely. Hayward and Harris, kind of a tie in my mind. I don't really see either getting done, but maybe. Going on to our third topic here. I know some of you are sick and tired of talking about this, and that's fine, but there is a new chapter in one of the most discussed offseason topics of this year, and that is the fact that wide receiver Brandon Aiyuk of the San Francisco 49ers has officially requested a trade. Up until this point, there's been strong indications that maybe this could happen, but he had never actually requested a trade. He'd done everything under the sun except for request a trade, and now he has kind of taken that leap or crossed that line, if you will. Joe, do you think this really changes anything at this point?
I think it's pretty minimal. I think the changes is that it brings a distraction and maybe puts more of an onus on the 49ers to try to get something done. But do I think it means he's going somewhere now? I don't. I mean, I think if San Francisco really wanted to trade him, they could have done it before the draft and picked up some draft capital for this year. Because you look, I mean, they want to compete. They want to win this year. They were on the Super Bowl last year. They are a really, really talented team. They have one of the best defenses in the league. They have weapons all over their offense. Trading Ayuk really does them no good. It's one of those situations where I think they would be okay letting him play out if things get bad and, for whatever reason they decide they don't want him back next season. If one of their rookies develops, then they can just say, hey, we had our 1 year with him. We can let him walk. I mean, hey, he's not going to sit out the season. All that was going to do is cost him if he does hit the market next offseason. I mean, he'll probably hold out during training camp. He'll get hit with a ton of fines because the CBA allows you to fine guys heavily for holding out. And so we'll see what happens. I mean, the 49ers went up to the wire with Nick Bosa last year to get a deal done. Same thing could happen if they get a deal done with Ayuk. And if they do get a deal done with Ayuk, then it's probably Deebo Samuel's last year in San Francisco. But I wouldn't be surprised if they just let him play out the last year on his fifth-year option. He's going to play. Same deal as Hayward. He's going to be motivated to play, wants to make, $30 million next offseason if he does become a free agent or if the team is to extend him. So 49ers really have no incentive to trade him unless somebody's going to throw him a Godfather offer. I mean, I saw there's an internet rumor floating out there that Devontae Adams could be headed if the Raiders acquire Ayuk. Antonio Pierce's familiarity with him from his time at Arizona State. I mean, that would be an interesting one because you get another elite top flight receiver, but how realistic that is, I'm not really sure at this point. That's kind of like a pretty big player for player trade, which we don't see all that often in the NFL. Um, so yeah, I don't think the request really changes much. I think San Francisco wants to keep him. He might make some noise and try to, do what he's doing and make it clear he wants his contract, he wants out. I think in the end he really wants his contract more than he wants to leave San Francisco, but as he makes noise and tries to make headlines, it is a distraction, but um now that he has the request, maybe San Francisco will act. We'll see. But I think he's going to be a Niner in 2024.
Yeah, I think I'm on the same page there, but it is interesting. Vegas, various odds makers over there do have the Steelers as the most likely team for his landing spot if indeed he does get traded. I don't know how they land on these things. I mean, obviously, Aiyuk mentioning the Steelers by name in the Pivot podcast the other week plays a big role in that, and just the large volume of offseason hype that local and national media have driven in terms of Aiyuk to the Steelers. I mean, I get all of that, but trading away what's probably at least a second round pick and then turning around, signing him to $30 million a year, that'd make him one of, if not the highest paid player on the roster. It'd be a massive shift for the Steelers and the way they do things. They, tend to draft and develop receivers pretty well, and they did just draft a receiver recently, and signing Aiyuk would mean what for George Pickens? And does that mean, you think that Aiyuk has a higher ceiling than George Pickens? I don't know if I fully agree with that assertion really at this point. I think we'll see. This will be Pickens' first year with a, I don't want to say actual quarterback, but I guess kind of actual quarterback, because Kenny Pickett, provided very little over the last 2 seasons. And so, another interesting talking point there is the fact that Ricky Pearsall, the 49ers first round pick, was placed on the non-football injury list. And so obviously I don't know the significance of that injury. I don't think I've seen it reported anywhere yet. But if he is in fact injured for, any period of time, even if he misses most of training camp, that factors into your decision if you're the 49ers trying to trade away Aiyuk, because like you said, they're knocking on the doors of bringing home a Lombardi trophy, and anything that you do to trade away good talent, it potentially hurts those chances. And so if Pearsall's hurt, you're not going to trade away Aiyuk at that point. They still have the option to franchise tag him next year and start this whole process over again. They still have the option to franchise tag him again 2 years from now, so they can conceivably keep him, basically against his will for another 2 seasons. Obviously, I think that would escalate what he does in terms of his holdouts and stuff, and how ugly that situation may become, but that is in the CBA, and so it is an option. Notable 49ers who have signed contracts in the past and their dates: George Kittle, August 13th, Fred Warner, July 21st, Deebo Samuel, July 31st, and Nick Bosa, September 6th. And so one of those dates has passed, or actually, no, none of those dates have passed. The Fred Warner deal would have been in 3 days from now, back when that was signed. The rest were later in the offseason. Some were significantly later. Bosa right up until basically the start of the regular season. And so this is something that could continue dragging out. It wouldn't be unusual for them to eventually sign him later in this process. I mean, Deebo Samuel essentially pulled all of the same moves that Aiyuk has pulled in terms of the trade request and, holding out or whatever. That's all been done before, and the 49ers ultimately caved in those situations and signed the players. I think that's still very much in play. In fact, when the trade request was reported, they did also report that teams have reached out about acquiring him. They have all been told, reportedly, I think this was via Schefter, that the 49ers have no intention of trading him, and they've been pretty consistent on that pretty much throughout this whole process, dating back to even the draft or dating back to, I think maybe one of the owners' meetings that him and Mike Tomlin had a conversation, and he said basically there's no intention on trading Aiyuk. And so I still don't see this happening, but it is, notable. You do have to talk about it because he did officially request the trade. That could potentially at least create some more urgency on the 49ers' part, and we'll see what happens from here. I still kind of think that the wide receiver 2 needs overblown. Obviously, it would make them a better team for the 2024 season, but they don't even know who their quarterback is next year. And so do you want to sign this guy to a top of the market deal and then not know who your quarterback is throwing to him for, what could be his whole contract that he signs? Sometimes it takes teams, several years to find their next suitable quarterback, and the Steelers are still very much in that mode, regardless of how Wilson or Fields may do this year. I mean, if Fields does well, there is a path to having a quarterback for the foreseeable future, but otherwise, it doesn't make a ton of sense to bring in a guy like Aiyuk at that kind of price. So that's where I'm at on that subject for now. Very quickly, I think we touched on it earlier, but the Steelers and the Buffalo Bills are holding a joint practice. That's a couple days ahead of their preseason game with the Bills. That'll be held at Acrisure Stadium, not at St. Vincent College in Latrobe. And so, being so close to a game, maybe not a full speed environment, if you will, maybe more of a walkthrough or just kind of individual drills, but certainly some good, iron sharpening iron competition to take place. See some faces that aren't on your own team, just kind of get like a more different looks than you would if you're just facing the same people every day. And so, Joe, do you have any last thoughts on that before we wrap up the show?
Yeah, no, I mean, like you said, there's really not I don't think there's gonna be all that much 2 days before practice. Probably really just a glorified walkthrough, but always good to, have a common opponent and you're not going up. And that's after the Steelers officially break camp. They're gonna be sick of going up against, just themselves. So ahead of their second preseason game, might as well get the juices flowing a little bit early. I like the decision. Always good. I mean, I'm a proponent of having joint practices. The Steelers haven't really done them, but yeah, I think it'll be good.
Yeah, it'll be at least something fun to write about when it comes around, although those are closed to the public and therefore closed to our Alex Kozora, who does go to a lot of the training camp practices and stuff. He won't have access to this one, so we'll be reliant on information that comes out from credentialed media and all like that. So that is our show for today. As I mentioned at the top of the show, please call the number at the bottom of the screen. Leave us a question. There's going to be a lot more to ask about, a lot more to think about, and a lot more to talk about starting next week with the beginning of training camp. That number's 412-254-3145. Again, that's 412-254-3145. Leave us a voicemail. We will answer your question, pretty much whatever it is. Ask away. And we do want to also plug that starting pretty soon, the Terrible Podcast, it's been in its Tuesday, Friday mode for the off season because there's less to talk about, but I would imagine pretty soon it'll be shifting back to Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And of course, during training camp, they have their emergency episodes or whatever, the kind of training camp special editions that come almost every day. And so there's going to be a ton of content coming your guys' way. Our team has grown and expanded since last year's training camp, so we're hoping to offer the best ever coverage of the event. We will have guys on site. We will have photos on site. We will have just everything that you could want about the Steelers during that time. So please do turn your notifications on Twitter, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, everything that you need to do to keep up with us. We will have content coming your way. I'm Ross, that's Joe. Thank you guys for tuning in, and we will catch you next time.